The French Quarter doesn't just exist in time, it loops. Jazz doesn't echo through these streets, it haunts them. The scent of beignets mingles with old blood and rum-soaked wood. You can hear the ghosts in the creak of wrought iron balconies and in the hushed stories that never made the textbooks. This was a place built on contradictions, by aristocrats and slaves, saved by artists and outcasts, beloved, abandoned, reborn, and almost demolished. We know it today as a place of music, of culture, of chaos and celebration, but to understand what the French Quarter truly is, you have to know what it survived. Before a single stone was laid, before the French flag waved or the Spanish rebuilt, this land was sacred. This was Bulbancha, the place of many tongues, a Choctaw trading nexus where dozens of tribes met, bartered, and blended. Not just goods were exchanged here, languages, ideas, and rituals flowed like the mighty Mississippi beside it. But the French had other ideas. In 1682, explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, claimed the entire Mississippi Basin for France, calling it Louisiana in honor of King Louis XIV. It was imperial fantasy. Until reality demanded a foothold at the river's mouth. By 1718, John Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville, tasked with creating a colonial capital, selected a crescent bend in the Mississippi River. Strategic, defensible, trade-rich. They drained swamps, drove pilings into the muck, and laid a European street grid over indigenous marshland. They named it La Nouvelle Orléans, New Orleans. But the Choctaw still called it Bubancha. In that tension, the forced renaming of sacred land, is where the story of the quarter begins. Early New Orleans was wet, wooden, and doomed. The settlers, unfamiliar with a subtropical climate, built with pine and cypress, materials that warped, rotted, and molded in the humidity. The first iteration of the Ursuline convent, built in 1734, collapsed into disrepair within a decade. Flooding from the Mississippi, swollen with spring rains, frequently swallowed the city. To fight it, the French built levees, crude earthen mounds meant to hold back a river that didn't like being held. The swamp fought back, flooding the streets, spreading disease, and reminding settlers that they were still trespassers. And then came the fires. In 1788, on Good Friday, flames swept through the quarter. Churches were closed, bells were silent. Over 850 buildings burned, including the original St. Louis Cathedral. 6 years later, in 1794, fire struck again. Nearly every original French structure gone. But the city didn't die, it transformed. Under Spanish rule, rebuilding came with strict mandates. Structures must be masonry, not wood. Walls should be thick, roofs tiled with slate. Buildings must feature courtyards to prevent fire from spreading again. The result? A new quarter, still French in name and spirit, but visibly Spanish, with its thick stucco walls, pastel hues, and iron-laced balconies. This was no longer a colonial experiment. It was becoming something permanent, something enduring. Behind every brick in the quarter was a back bent in chains. By the mid-1700s, New Orleans had become the center of the domestic slave trade in the American South. Tens of thousands of enslaved Africans passed through the Place des Nègres, a slave market at the edge of the quarter. The city's beauty, its Creole cuisine, its Baroque homes, its grand carriages was built upon human suffering. Plantations lining the river grew fat off sugar and cotton, and New Orleans was their beating heart. Ships arrived daily, loaded with goods and with people. And yet, from this oppression came culture. Enslaved Africans brought with them rhythms, rituals, and languages that merged with French and Spanish traditions. They played drums in Congo Square, a rare freedom allowed on Sundays, where musical fusion began. These gatherings were the seeds of jazz, long before it had a name. The architecture mirrored this duality. Hidden courtyards offered privacy and secrecy. Elaborate balconies showcased wealth, while beneath them, misery unfolded. New Orleans was a masquerade, elegance on the surface, brutality underneath. The Civil War ended slavery, but it didn't end struggle. The planter elite lost their wealth, and their townhouses in the quarter became burdens. They retreated to the Garden District, selling off their Vieux Carré properties to whoever could afford the taxes. The quarter sank into poverty. Streets, once lit by candlelight, became shrouded in shadow. Walls crumbled. Gardens grew wild. By the 1890s, many saw the French Quarter as an embarrassing slum, but others saw a canvas. Writers like William Faulkner and Tennessee Williams found inspiration in its decay. Bohemians, musicians, and immigrants took root in the old bones of the city, and from that patchwork came a sound the world had never heard: jazz. It was born in the back alleys, nurtured in saloons, and raised by brass bands. Trumpets wailed where plantation bells once rang, and the French Quarter, so long a monument to hierarchy, became the birthplace of rebellion through rhythm. By the early 1900s, New Orleans was, quote, modernizing. Developers saw only dollar signs where balconies sagged. In 1911, an entire block between Royal and Charter was leveled to build the Louisiana Supreme Court. The message was clear. The old quarter wasn't sacred, it was expendable. But one woman disagreed. Elizabeth Werlin, an opera lover and preservationist, led a grassroots campaign to protect what remained. She photographed crumbling facades, published essays, rallied artists, and called for legislative action. In 1936, her efforts paid off. The Vieux Carré Commission was created, giving legal protection to one of the oldest neighborhoods in America. From that moment on, no building in the French Quarter could be torn down or drastically altered without scrutiny. It was no longer just a neighborhood, it was a historic district. A phoenix of wrought iron and stone. After the Vieux Carré Commission solidified the quarter's historic status, a new tension emerged, not of destruction, but of commercialization. Preservation brought attention brought tourists, and tourists brought money. By the 1940s, Bourbon Street transformed, not into the cultured heart of Creole society, but into a spectacle. Neon signs replaced candlelit windows, jazz halls gave way to strip clubs, and the French Quarter became a paradox once again, a sacred, historic site dressed in a party mask. Some saw it as betrayal, others saw it as evolution. Writers like Truman Capote drank absinthe in the shadows of fading elegance. Musicians hustled for stage time as cover bands replaced brass bands. Tourists poured in by the thousands, chasing an idea of New Orleans often manufactured just for them. Meanwhile, preservationists fought to protect the quarter's identity. Activists blocked new high-rise hotels. The Preservation Hall opened in 1961, not as a museum, but as a working venue to keep traditional jazz alive. This wasn't just about saving buildings. It was about guarding culture from dilution, and as the 20th century rolled on, that fight only grew louder. Then came the hurricane that nearly broke the city. August 29, 2005. Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast. Levees failed, water surged, neighborhoods drowned, over 1,800 lives lost, entire communities erased. The world watched in horror. But something strange happened in the French Quarter. It stayed dry. Thanks to its historic elevation, designed in the 1700s to avoid floods, the Vieux Carré largely survived the deluge. But it did not survive untouched. The quarter became a ghost town. Music silenced, tourists vanished, locals fled. It wasn't water that threatened the French Quarter. It was emptiness. And yet, from that silence, a new rhythm began. Artists returned. Bartenders reopened ancient doors. Mardi Gras rolled again, muted, bruised, but alive. In candlelit clubs and on the balconies, locals raised a glass to survival. Not because they had recovered, but because they refused to vanish. Katrina didn't destroy the French Quarter. It clarified its importance, a living monument, not just to beauty, but to grit. Walk through the quarter today and you'll see a city in tension. Always. It's TikTokers and tarot cards. It's drunken bachelor parties and impromptu brass bands on Royal Street. It's $9 hurricanes and $2 poetry typed on Royal Underwood typewriters. It's still a masquerade. Only now, the masks are digital. But look deeper, and the soul is still there. Listen to the brass on Frenchman Street. Smell the spices curling from a courtyard kitchen on Dauphine. Watch a second-line funeral wind through cobblestones like a slow-moving prayer. You'll see that this place isn't frozen in time. It's layered by time and still writing its own chapters. Gentrification threatens, climate change looms, but the quarter still breathes. It's the defiant heartbeat of a city that should not exist, but somehow does. The French Quarter didn't survive by accident. It survived because it adapted, resisted, and remembered. It has outlived empires, it has danced through disasters, and it has laughed in the face of ruin more than once. It is not simply a destination, it is a conversation across centuries. Between the sacred and the profane, the past and the now, the truth and the myth. This is not just New Orleans. This is the French Quarter, and it is still alive. Some places wear their history like a costume, but the French Quarter, it bleeds it. Every stone, every shadow, every street name whispers a story, some written in ink, others buried beneath the floorboards. Here, history isn't locked behind glass. It's sung on balconies, it's poured into glasses, it's painted on time-worn walls and echoed in the footfalls of a million souls who walked before. We've traced the fault lines of fire, flood, empire, and erasure, and still the quarter stands. Because this place doesn't just remember the past, it insists on living it. And so, we close this page of the dusty ledger, knowing that in New Orleans, the story is never truly over. Only paused between the next note, the next storm, the next ghost. Until then, stay curious, stay haunted, and never stop listening for the echoes.